What's up, everybody? Axe Wizard here, back with another update for my game. Now, I've done quite a few changes. I had to refactor lots of code, but let me just show you what I've got. So, first things first, let's pop this baby full screen, and let's go down to our faction testing system, and we'll go watch some combat and see what we see. So I added some new weapons and refactored how I handle weapons, because weapons were some of my earliest code that I ever did. So let's just jump in here. So you can see we've got a tomahawk here. So you can see we've got Coalition has different types of weapons. You can see we've got beams in full force now. So beams are working pretty good. I had to handle some changes there, but I love how the beams are actually like drilling into, so I add some particle effects and stuff there now. Beams just look so cool, man. So yeah, lots of beam action happening now. I think I might have made the Coalition too strong, because it seems like every time I run this, the Syndocracy gets their butt kicked. But I don't know. So I also added like a new turret on top of this guy. So you see this big double turret right here. I also did like muzzle flashes too. So you'll see like the weapons firing, there's little muzzle flashes now. On top of that, I can handle firing from multiple points on a weapon. So that double barrel turret was a test, and it works pretty well. So I need to make it like more bigger though. But yeah, so far the Coalition is definitely taking an early lead. One change I think I'm gonna make is beams, beam turrets. I think I need to really slow them down, because right now how the turret targeting code works is that if there's an enemy in range, it'll just snap to it and just start shooting it. So you saw like the beams like tracking everybody, like going stupid fast. I think I'm gonna add a turn speed to the turrets, because otherwise why would you run anything but turrets if you can just always guaranteed hit your targets? So I think if I make the turrets slower but have a much longer range, then you'll have you'll be at a disadvantage when you're at range, but once you get in close, like if you're a fighter, you should be able to just like run circles around the ships, and you should be able to just not worry about their beam, and just, you know, their other regular turrets will still give you some trouble, but the beam won't be able to chase you fast enough. So I think that's a good trade-off, is the beam has the beam turret will have a longer range but much slower. I think that's a pretty good trade-off. But so far, yeah, I think it's looking way cooler now that, you know, all these ships have their own kind of armaments. So you'll notice that the Coalition tends to use like machine guns, and they're very fighter heavy. So they've got like 3 or 4 different fighters. They're very fighter heavy. So they've got at least 3 fighters. And they have a fighter that has 2 weapons, a fighter that has 4 weapons, and a fighter that's got 6 weapons. So this guy right here, the Coalition Spearhead, this is a big fighter. It's got 6 weapons on there. It's got a light gun. It's got 2 light guns, 2 medium guns, and then two beams on it. And I think maybe that might be too powerful. Maybe I should make that one a cruiser or something. That way it's not. It seems like it's. I think I'm gonna keep it. That's a lot of beams. Holy cow. Okay, so sound is starting to get choppy. The game's starting to lag now. So we've got over 100 ships on screen. And so I should add a count for how many ships there are, but we definitely have a lot of ships on screen. So that's pretty cool that we're able to support all that. But that's what I've been up to, is tweaking the weapons systems. So if you want to like take a look at the various weapons, so I updated. You can see like I added. So if we look at this ship right here, you can see these right here, these are laser turrets. So those actually emit lasers. And when you're firing, so if you look at my little ship here, when I'm firing, you can see it has the muzzle flash, and then the actual projectile originates from there. So I don't think the muzzle flash is being colored though. I might need to fix that, because that's supposed to be colored. There we go. So if I save that and run it, now my muzzle flashes should look like, there we go. Now it's the color of the projectile I'm firing. So I did a lot of things. Let's jump into the code review section. All right. So on my list of things done since last episode, I tweaked laser to have particles and to also be colorable. So last episode, I got beams like barely working. Like it was a rough work in progress. For the most part, I nailed it, but I made a few tweaks and enhancements. So first things first, I have a variable called beam color, and so I'm controlling the color via code, and I also did it with all my projectiles. I'll get into that in just a second. But I made a weapons auto load. So this weapons auto load has the various colors that we're going to use for our projectiles and beams and muzzle flashes. So currently right now I've only got like 5 colors uncolored. So for the example of like when I'm shooting a missile, I already have that missile colored how I want it to. I don't want to color it a different color because then it looks really weird. So I just leave that set to normal. Uncolored, which is just the color white. I'm not coloring that at all. It's already colored as it is. And then I have colors for green, blue, red, and yellow. So those are the ones I support right now. I'm going to add in some more. Like I'm going to add like pink, purple, and a few other ones. But those are the ones I've got right now. So I can easily add more colors and make that work. And then I have a master list of all the weapons. So I did this because when I started weapons, I think weapons were one of the earliest things I did. So after I got ship movement working, I did weapons when I ported this game to Godot, and I was still learning the engine, and it was pretty rough. So I had to refactor my weapons code quite a bit, and I ran into a case where, I've got like for example, my light beam and light beam turret. Like those are basically the same weapon, just different colors depending on the faction. Well, I don't want to make a bunch of different scenes. I want to be able to leverage that same scene, but then just change the things I want about it. So I made this master list of all the different weapons. So we have like, Synthocracy light cannon. I'm also going to have weapon descriptions because I'm thinking ahead to when I start implementing ship customization, as well as when you're trying to buy upgrades for your ships or even buy a new ship, you want to see what weapons it has. I plan on having a ship info screen that will show your ship and all your weapon slots with the currently occupied weapons in them, and you're gonna be able to like move those around and maybe not move them around, but you'll be able to swap out the weapons that's in the weapon slot. And so thinking ahead doing that, I want to have a master list that I can easily populate like a store screen. So I have like a base price here that I'm not even using yet. I just threw that in there as a placeholder. So I'm going to have a description of like what the weapon is, just normal stuff. The path to the actual scene that I'm using, so light cannon in this case. So for like my light beam laser, I have an ordinary light beam laser, which is an ordinary blue color. So you see it has the same path, weapon / light beam. I also have a Synthocracy light beam, which is green, and this references the same scene. And we also have a Coalition light beam, which is red. So same resource, uses different things. So this allows me to customize things a little bit and get some control over that better. So once I made this weapons list, I went into my weapons slot, and I made this big ugly export that just sort of matches the contents of what's in that weapons master list. I don't know of a way of kind of dumping dictionary keys just into an export via code, so I have to copy and paste them for now. So I have a to-do to not have to duplicate dictionary keys. It'd be cool if I can do that. I don't know if that's possible or not. Looking through the documentation and examples, I don't see a way currently. So there's a way you can do it with enums, but that would give me a number and not a string, and I don't want that. I want these actual strings. So I have this exported variable called weapon name. So when I go to look at a ship, so say if I pull up my trusty Synthocracy shuttle, where are you at, buddy? There you are. So if I go up here to my node list and I click on weapon slot 1 here, and I go over here to, before I was using the scene, so I had weapons packed scene. I can actually get rid of this variable now because I'm not using it. But I was dragging and dropping my weapon scene there, and that was what was occupying the weapon slot. But now I changed it, so I'm loading it from this weapon name variable. So I have it set to Synthocracy Light Cannon. And what weapon slot does is, let's go back to the script here. We'll go back to weapon slot. So in the ready function, you can see before it was just setting my, I have this weapon variable here, and it was setting that weapon variable to be my weapon pack scene instanced. So I was instancing my weapon pack scene, and I was setting that as my actual weapon node, and then I was updating the ship owner before. But I updated it to, if weapon name is included in that master weapons list, then if it's not, we don't want to do anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to, if it is in that list, we're going to set our weapon. We're going to load that resource. So you can see we're loading that path from the weapons list. We're instancing it. And then from there, I'm setting the variables like I was before, the ship owner variable. And I'm also setting the weapon ammo color to be what the specified ammo color is for that weapon. So I'm setting that there. And then in the weapons code, I had to make a lot of changes here. So I did a lot of changes here. So let's just jump into that. So first things first, let's see. So I added these variables here, turret range and turret turn speed. I haven't implemented turret turn speed yet. I'm still working on that. So I haven't implemented that yet, but I've got it ready to go. And then I also changed how we're handling sounds, because when I made my audio manager, there's so many changes. This is gonna be messy. I don't know how to keep this concise. It's going to be jumping around because there was lots of different changes that touched a lot of different things to accomplish this simple task because of how poorly I coded it in the first place. And to be honest, I don't think I've coded it much better. I just slapped a band-aid on it and called it good for now. So before, with my audio manager, I had like these sound groups, because my thought process was because for a while I was running into a problem to where sounds were being really, like, if you get more than 5 ships on the screen shooting, the sounds were like so distorted, and it was blowing out my master bus, and it was way too loud. And even if I cranked it way down, there was just too many sounds. So I thought, okay, what if I just make groups of sounds and I just modify the sounds slightly to make them like different duration, maybe add like a little bit different effect. So that way, if you've got like 5 of the same sounds playing at the same time, they're not going to be the same sounds. They're all going to be slightly different. So it's not going to have that that distorted effect. Well, I think the way that I ended up solving it made this all useless. So I tried to stay away from these sound groups, and I just set my weapon to use to allow me to specify a sound path. So whatever path of the sound I want to play, because I don't think I need those sound groups anymore. We had lots of ships on the screen, and the sound sounded okay. It didn't sound necessarily great. I could probably add some more variation to the sounds via code, but it didn't sound as bad as it used to be. It didn't sound as bad as it was that when made me try out sound groups. So right now I'm using Fire Sound Group to name the. Let me back up. Holy cow! This is it's only almost midnight here, so no wonder I'm so scattered. But how I ended up solving my sound problem was that I ended up creating sound players on my ships via code for each type of weapon. So, for example, if a ship has 16 light cannons, and they're all firing at the same time, they're all going to use the same sound player. So it's only going to play that sound once. That way it's not 16 sounds being played at the exact same time. It's like 16 times the volume. You don't want that. So if I have, say for example, like one of my coalition fighters has, 2 light cannons, 2 medium cannons, and then it has 2 lasers. So if it's firing all those at once, both of the light cannons are going to use the same audio player. Both of the medium cannons are going to use another sound player, and then both the lasers are going to use another sound player. So that way we're not duplicating sounds like on a per weapon basis. They're all duplicated on a per ship basis. So if you've got 3 ships with the same weapons and they're all firing at the same time, it's going to play 3 sounds at the same time. But thankfully, because of how the game works now, you're never going to really be firing at the same time, just because ships are in different positions. The timing's a little bit different. So in the melee, it sounds a lot better. So yeah, so I was trying to phase out fire sound groups. So enough of that tangent. So here's just for fun, here's our sound player. This is being set by the ship. I don't think I've changed that code at all since I implemented that in whatever devlog that was implemented. Probably around when I was implementing my audio manager is when that was done. So the big changes here is I changed weapons fundamentally to use muzzle flashes. So what does this mean? Let's take a look at an actual weapon first from a visual perspective. Here we go. Here's a perfect example. So we have this heavy cannon turret here, right? Now this has a sprite, just like I did before, and then now we also have this muzzle flash here. Now we have 2 muzzle flashes, so this one single weapon actually has 2 separate, it has multiple areas that it can fire from. So for example, if we're firing, we want to make a projectile here, and we want to make a projectile here. So how I have this working right now is that I can set up to 5 different muzzle flashes, and every time the weapon wants to fire, it will just cycle to the next muzzle flash. So say for example, if this is our first muzzle flash here, when it goes to fire, it's going to fire from this barrel. And if we look at our weapon cooldown here, so we've got weapon cooldown 1. That seems excessive. So it's a 1 second cooldown. Let's make that a little quicker. Let's make that 0.5. There we go. So it's got a half second cooldown. So basically every second it's going to be firing from the barrel. So it's going to be a boom, 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 boom. It's going to alternate from the barrels, which is pretty cool. So I can make really ornate weapons now that might have like 5 barrels on it, and I can just I can have muzzle flashes like from all of them, and that is really cool. On top of that, rather than having the projectile be made from the center, I'm creating my projectile from where the muzzle flash is. So whatever muzzle flash we're currently using, that's where I'm creating my projectile. So now projectiles don't like overlap with the gun. Before, like when I was using my laser, you would see the gun, and then you would see the laser like right on top of it, and it looked really bad. So this eliminates that problem as well. So this allows me to do more sophisticated, complex weapons, as well as make it so I don't have all that overlap on my weapons. It looks a lot cleaner, and the muzzle flash is a pretty good addition. I think the muzzle flash probably like is visible for too long. It needs to be like an actual flash, so I might tweak that. But yeah, so let's go back into the code. So for muzzle flashes, first things first, I have a function called init muzzle flashes. So this is meant to be called in my ready function. So you can see here, ready, and where am I doing? Here we go. We are doing initialize muzzle flashes. So we're calling this function in my ready function. So what we're doing here is I'm basically saying there should never be more than 5 points of fire on a single weapon. So like I should never have more than like 5 places to fire a projectile from on a weapon. No, I shouldn't have more than 5 muzzle flashes. So what I'm doing is I'm just doing a loop, for I in 5. So that's going to give me 0 to 4 is what that's going to give me. And then what I'm doing here is I'm attempting to get a sprite node for the muzzle flash. So since I'm naming my muzzle flash the same thing, muzzle flash 1 through 5, what I'm doing is I'm starting at 0. I'm starting at 0, and I'm always adding 1 to it. So again, I is 0 indexed, so we add 1 to it. So in this case here, if this is the first iteration, I'm doing muzzle flash. String I plus 1, which would equal 1. So muzzle flash 1. Every weapon should have at least 1 muzzle flash. So if we can get that, so we're getting get node or null. So if it doesn't get a muzzle flash, it's not going to throw a error to the console. It's just going to return null. So, and then we're doing, hey, is this instance valid? If it returns null, it's not a valid instance. So if it is valid, then we are going to append it to our array. So I have this array called muzzle flashes up here. So this will be set in ready. This is what we're setting. So it's just initialized as an empty array. And then so we are going through and in our we're adding it to our array. And then once we find it, we're going to continue, which means it's going to skip to the next iteration of the loop. So if we did not continue our iteration yet, this means that we did not find a valid sprite. So we're going to assume that that no more exist, because I'm not going to have muzzle flash 1 and muzzle flash 3. I'm going to have muzzle flash 1 and muzzle flash 2. So if I get a null instance, then my logic says, hey, nothing else is going to happen here. Just break out of the array, or break out of the loop. That's what I should do. Break out of loop. Here we go. So once we're done once we're done looping through and getting all of our muzzle flashes, we're going to loop through our muzzle flashes, and what we're going to do is we're going to verify, hey, we're just checking if the instance is valid. I'd always like to verify the instance exists before trying to modify properties. That way I don't get any crashes or errors in the game if for some reason something isn't set how it should be. So what I'm doing here is, hey, it's valid, set color. So we're setting the modulate property of the muzzle flash to equal our ammo color. And then we're also setting the alpha property of the modulate property to be 0. So that way it's invisible. So now what I have then is in my process function, which again runs every frame, I have a handle muzzle flashes function here, which accepts delta, which is the time elapsed since last frame. So if we look at our handle muzzle flashes, so this handles the alpha of all muzzle flashes expected to be called in process, which is what we are doing here. So again, all we're doing is we're just iterating through all we're iterating through all of our muzzle flashes. And again, we're ensuring that we have a valid instance. If we don't, we're just going to skip to the next iteration. If we do have a valid instance, we're going to decrease the alpha. So if the alpha is greater than 0, we're going to decrease the alpha. So here I just said should take quarter second to completely fade. Again, delta is the time elapsed since the last frame. So if I wanted to subtract it by delta, it would go from 1 to 0 over the span of a second. So to make it a quarter second, I just multiply delta by 4. I think I might make it an eighth of a second. So I'll do multiply by 8. And that'll make it flash a lot faster. So what this is doing is this is continuously iterating through all of my muzzle flashes. And if the alpha is greater than 0, it's going to keep reducing it until it is 0. So then I just have this check to make sure that we're not going out of bounds. I never want my alpha to be 0. I think Godot won't even let you do that. I think it'll just cap it to 0, but I just want to be sure. So I'm explicitly setting that in the code here so that way there's no confusion. And I'm making sure that that's happened. So there we go. So that's happening. And then how I'm using muzzle flashes is in my fire weapon function, which is what my ship calls when it wants to fire the weapon. What I'm doing here is for all of my projectile weapons, what I'm doing is I have a function called get muzzle flash position. So normally I was setting my projectile position as like my weapon's global position, because the projectile is going to be added to the main scene and not as a child of me. That way my transform movements don't influence my child node, so my projectile. So if my projectile is not a child of myself, if I shoot and then I rotate, my bullet doesn't also rotate with me. So this prevents that. So we need to use global position. So I made this get muzzle flash position function. And what this does is this just simply returns like the muzzle flash of our current, it just returns the global position of our current muzzle flash, which is a variable that I set way up top here. Where is it? Here we go. So this just determines which muzzle flash will be used. So since our array is 0 indexed, I set it to be 0. And then whenever we fire a weapon, we're using that current muzzle flash. And then once we're done, we're going to increment that muzzle flash to use the next one. And it's going to check if we're out of bounds and then just set it back to 0 if we are. So that way I can have multiple muzzle flashes that just keep cycling through. So that's why that is there, and that's how that is working. So yeah, muzzle flash position. So then let's go back to our fire weapon here. There we go. So we're doing get muzzle flash position, and then we are going to increment our muzzle flash selector. So I have this function called next muzzle flash. And what this does is this updates the alpha of our current muzzle flash. So we're setting the alpha to be 1, which means it's fully visible. And then we're going to increment our muzzle flash value. So we're just going to add 1 to it. And then next we're going to ensure that we're not out of bounds for our array. So if we are a weapon that only has 1 muzzle flash, and we increment this current muzzle flash value by 1, it would go from 0 to 1. Well, if we only have 1 entry in our array, this is going to be out of bounds. So what we're doing is, we're saying, is current muzzle flash greater than muzzle flash's size minus 1? Because again, arrays are 0 indexed. If it is, we are out of bounds. Just reset it back to 0. So back to fire weapon. So we're setting our next muzzle flash, and then that's what we're doing there. I also commented on all this stuff via SoundPath. Whenever my ship sets up the sound player for me, it's also setting the stream, so I don't have to keep loading the same damn sound file to play the sound. So I just commented that stuff out for now. I'm going to get rid of it later. So to do, let me do a real comment here. Remove this commented code when no longer needed. Boom, save. So I think that's most of what I did. Also for beam weapons, I made it work as a turret. So, and to do that, so I have this code here that just looks at the target global position, and then that way, because before my only turrets were projectile turrets, so they were using this predict target position function, which wasn't working as a beam because the beam is instantaneously fired, like it goes max range instantly because it's a beam. Whereas projectiles have a speed, and it was using that speed and like taking it was basically predicting where the bullet would hit the target, so that way it has the improved AI. Well, we don't want to use that for projectiles. So if we have predict target position, which is a variable that I have set, if we have it set to true, which I think I always have it set for right now, but I wanted to make it like a option that you can buy like a guidance system for your weapons to make it better. So that's why that's there. So we're just verifying if that's true, and if we have projectile type is actually a projectile. I should probably change this to like ammo type, but whatever. Then we're gonna look at the position that is returned by predict target position. So I made that small tweak to make beams work for turrets, and that worked a lot better. And I think that was all the big changes I had to make to weapon. Yeah. So that was a big change I had to make to weapon. I guess that's most of the big changes there, actually. Lots of just tweaks within weapons to make it all work, and a lot of going through and like modifying each ship to use the new ways I specify weapons. So a lot of that. So let's see. We talked about tweak laser to have particles. I did not talk about that. I should have talked about that. Holy cow. So lasers have particles now. So if we go to our projectiles and we go to beam, so you can see here we have our line 2D just like we did before, except I set the color to be white, and I set the self-modulate property to be raw, and then I cranked it up to 3 for red, green, and blue. So that way, when it interacts with the with my world environment, which I have set to use glow, which I covered I think in last episode, beams will now glow. So I set it to be white, so I can set my modulate property to color it how I like, and then my self-modulate property just makes it glow, basically. So I added a particles origin. So these are the particles that are blowing this way. So my particles end, if I set this here, so whenever I actually hit something, it'll look like I'm actually hitting it. So these are just very simple particles. So I've got those set, and I just updated my beam code so that whenever I set my endpoint for my beam, so we have set beam endpoint here. I'm also updating the position for my line as well as my end position. So, and if we're not actually hitting anything, I'm not rendering the particles end. I'm just setting them to be not. I'm just setting them to be false, so they're not emitting. And I had to make a tweak to how beams work. I was running into a thing to where if I was shooting a ship with a beam and it was going away from me, it was almost like the beam wasn't detecting that collision properly, and it kept going through them and not dealing damage. And I think it's because there's something weird with Godot to where all of my code so far has been done in the process function. I haven't used anything physics-wise, because I'm handling all the, you know, I don't want my ships to like bounce off of each other. I don't want my projectiles to collide with the very first solid thing that it hits. I'm handling all that code. I'm handling every collision thing myself. So apparently Raycast 2D doesn't like working in process. It only works in process. It only works in physics process. Well, those run at very different times apparently. So what I think what's happening is that physics process was running. It was setting the endpoint, and then I think like process would run after, and like say if my ship moves away, well the endpoint's already set, but it's not detecting that collision anymore. So what I did to get around that is I refactored it. So here I left a big comment that kind of explains what my loose understanding of it. So here we have to do some funky stuff. If a ship is moving away from us, there's a chance where our beam's endpoint is set to the collision but doesn't actually detect the collision, so the beam keeps going through the enemy. Unsure of why, but if I add 5 more length to the vector, it should resolve the issue for most cases. So what we're doing here is that rather than setting it to be the exact collision point, I'm adding like 5 pixels to just give it a little more leeway. So if a ship is moving away, it's still going to have that collision detection. It's just sort of like some like safety padding to make it work. So I'm doing that to local get collision point, because get collision point gets a global position. So we're converting that to a local position. So I'm saving that as this variable called collision point or col point. And then what I'm doing is I'm getting a new magnitude, and I'm just getting the length of that vector. I'm just adding 5 to it. And then what I'm doing is I'm normalizing the collision point vector, and then I'm multiplying it by the new magnitude, which just makes it that new length. So if the magnitude of the original collision point was 100, and I add 5 to it, now the new magnitude is 105. So it just keeps it going in the same direction where it was, and just makes it a little farther. And that solved the issue. So now beams are working much better. They're not going through enemies. If an enemy's there, it hits them, it does damage, the world's happy, everything's great. So that's super cool. So I did that tweak to beams. That was all I had to do there. So let's go ahead and wipe that off the list. Changes to weapon classes. To weapons class, I talked about beam changes. So beam turrets worked. Talked about how I changed sounds. I can color projectiles now. So I have an ammo color variable like in my weapons list. So what I had to do is in my sprites, let me see, where's my sprites down here? So I have my sprites and purchased, and so these are sprites I actually bought off of a site, and I think I have the link down here for, let's see, open game art, purchased assets. It's one of these. Space projectiles, it's this one here. So if we copy this and go to a web browser, there we go. So I paid, oh actually, select price. Oh, so this was a free thing. I purchased it for $0 apparently, but it's still licensed. So it's still under the standard license. So I still have the link. So I got these space projectiles, and the guy gave it to me in 3 different styles. So we have three different colors. We've got the blue, the yellowish orange, then we have like this reddish pink. And that was cool. And he also gave it to us with the option of glow or no glow. Well, since I'm already doing glow inside the game, I went and I used the no glow assets. And then what I did is in Krita, I'll just fire this up really quick to show you what my process was. So in Krita, I'm just going to go import export. I'm going to import a layer. And I'm going to find one of these things. So you see we have PNGs, no blur, blue. So I'm going to load up, one of these here. There we go. So let's zoom in on this bad boy here. So, and let's get rid of this background. So this is the default thing. So what I did to make it so I could colorize it is I right-clicked on this layer and I went to add, and I added a filter mask. And I went under the adjust section here, and I went to HSV HSL adjustment. And what I did is I cranked down the saturation and then brought up the brightness quite a bit. And then what this does is that this lets me change it via the modulate property, so I can color it in the game, and that way I can color it whatever I want. So I made that change there to all those, it's like all 15 projectiles, and then I imported those into Godot, and that's what I was doing there. So that was the big thing, is that I can now color projectiles now. So I did that. Let's see, I modify weapon slot to allow me to select a weapon from a list. I think I talked about that, but just to show that in action, if I go to, you know, my Synthocracy shuttle here, and I go to the 2D, if I click on my weapon slot over here, you can see now I have this weapon name, and I can select from this list here. So I'm pretty sure I talked about this earlier, but I can select what weapon I want this weapon slot to have. So right now I've got Synthocracy Light Cannon, but if I want to play around with something crazy, like if I want my Synthocracy Heavy Turret here. So even though this is a light weapon slot, I don't have any checking or restrictions on that. So I'm loading in a heavy weapon. So if I hit save on this and run it, it's going to look really goofy because I'll have this huge ass turret on my ship. But I can't actually shoot. I can't actually initiate combat with anything either because I can't shoot them, because this is an automated turret. So it will just shoot any attackers. So, but I can set this back to, like, if I want to test out my Coalition light gun. So I made a little machine gun. So you can, if I zoom in here, you can see that. Boom. There we go. We got machine guns. Boom, 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 boom. I figure like Coalition of free worlds, they're like, you know, the humans who broke off from the AI. They just want to preserve human stuff, and like guns, you know, guns are pretty old. You know, you may not have all that exact cool space tech, but you got guns. And if I want to give them the Synthocracy or Coalition medium gun, it's just a slightly bigger gun. So you can see it kind of looks like a 50 cal or something, but boom, 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 yeah. That muzzle flash looks a lot better. So yeah, let's go light this pig up. What, you want a piece of me? Oh god, I just ate a missile to the face. I suck at aiming. But yeah, so I can now just change the weapon here without having like drag and drop a weapon scene. So that's pretty cool. That's what that change was. So yeah, modified that. I know I talked about the code earlier. I redid projectiles so I can color them with code. I talked about that. Added a few more weapons. You guys saw those. I've got a few more still to add. So if I go to my sprites, I go to hand drawn, and I go to weapons. So I've got this dual medium cannon to add. So I still have to add that. I also have like this force blaster that I think was going to launch like one of those like sound projectiles. That could be pretty cool. And I also have a heavy cannon, which is going to shoot a big old projectile. I made this laser emitter, which you already saw. Let's see, what else we got? Those are the new ones. I mean, I also added like the light gun and then the medium gun. I also made a medium gun turret. So I made like turret options for all the new stuff, so I can add more turret options. But I'm gonna wait until I figure out how to handle the turning before I add more turrets. So yeah, Added new weapons. I'm still working on a few, so I'm adding stuff there, but making the weapons work how I want to, like, it seemed like it was a really big task, so I've just been kind of chipping away at it over the few days since the last devlog. And I haven't really sat down and worked. Like, I worked on it for probably 2 or 3 hours today, but it's mostly been like 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there, just kind of setting things up and just thinking about how I want to handle it, and doing a lot of thinking about the future systems for, like, you know, purchasing ships and upgrading your ship and customizing it. So I've been thinking about that. So I think the design I implemented here should work. But anyway, that's what I got to show you of just refactoring weapons. And I can now color my projectiles. I can color the beams. I can have muzzle flashes now, and there's more weapon variety. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in whatever video I make next.